I'm Wendy Capewell, an experienced counsellor and psychotherapist. I work with so many people who feel that they're the only ones struggling with the issues that they share with me. Possibly, like many of you, they feel so alone. And so the aim of this podcast is to talk to guests who have their own stories to share, their experience of the struggles that they've been through, or maybe they're continuing to live with, offering their insights as well as their inspiring journey. So let me introduce my guest.
My guest today is such an interesting lady. I've got to admit that I interviewed her before, but the quality was so bad. I said, I'm sorry, Jo, and I've got to do this again because the quality was too bad to actually produce. And so Jo Ann Richards has very kindly agreed to go through this all again with me. So thank you, Jo Ann.
Thank you for having me.
You are so welcome. I find your story so fascinating, your life story so far. Yes, you are a wife, a mother, a grandmother, a bookkeeper, author. I mean, it goes on forever. But I'm going to hand over to you, Jo Ann, so that you introduce yourself.
All right. Well, I'm Jo Ann Richards. I am based in Portland, Oregon. And like you said, I am a wife of almost 20 years. And I've been with the current husband for almost 25 years. I have a daughter in her 40s and 3 grandchildren, 13, 16, and 19. So I get to see them every now and then because they're all very busy, as teenagers are. I have a thriving bookkeeping practice. And I'm also, I wrote a book and published it last year called MIDLIFE MAGIC, about my life and about my change in spiritual paths. And I was a Mormon for like 30 years and left the church through no traumatic experience, but I just, decided it wasn't for me anymore. And I found a spirituality in different areas. And so I've been making a lot of changes in my life and improving myself and taking good care of myself and continuing to improve my marriage. And, so things are a lot better and things have changed a lot over the last 20 years. And I'm happy about my book and I'm happy about my changes and all kinds of good things are happening. And, what was I going to say? Oh, I know. It's like besides bookkeeping, I have great passion about UFOs and aliens and paranormal and magic, things like that. So I'm not just a bookkeeper.
You're far from that. And I have started reading your book, MIDLIFE MAGIC.
Thank you.
And it's such an interesting story. It gives quite a lot of insight into your marriages and your relationships. I mean, I haven't got past those yet because you were in 6 different former relationships,
right,
before you found love with your current partner and husband.
Correct.
And I think I've said to you, I think your tenacity, that not giving up, I think that's incredible. I mean, you didn't say, some people would have turned quite bitter and angry, I think, when relationships didn't work, and yet you haven't. You've continued to you continue to search for the right person, all right? We all go, well, okay, was that the best idea? Maybe it's not always, but hey, you still continued on that. And talking to you on several occasions now, I find you such a warm person.
Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting because my daughter graciously, even though I put her through a lot of crappy stepfathers, she has applauded me for not giving up and to continue to try. And it's interesting because I looked at there's a chapter in the book about, why get married at all? And why did I keep getting married? Because, I grew up in the 50s and 60s. And so you grow up with the image of, the stay-at-home mom and, the loving family and the white picket fence, and everything's going to be rosy. And if you find Mr. Right, life is going to be grand. And I don't know why I continue to believe that, because my parents didn't always have a rosy, grand marriage. And I saw that firsthand. But then, and my family was not Mormons, but I joined the church through some friends. And in, the Mormon church is big on family and, having your forever family and marrying Mr. Right. And so my image between the two was, that the thing to do was to get married, find Mr. Right, of course, get married and have a bunch of kids. Well, the universe said you're only going to have one kid. So I never had the, 10 or 12 I thought I, would just naturally have, because that's what you do. So the universe was very wise and blessed me with one great kid. And so that was great. But also growing up as a Mormon, you're told, no sex before marriage, and they didn't even say absolutely no living together. And, so then the hormones are raging. And so number one, I never courted long enough to really get to know the guys as well as I could have. And I always assumed that, okay, if we're both Mormons and we both believe in, having a family and have basically the same values, then naturally we're just going to get along and the marriage is going to be perfect and we're going to be this happy spiritual family. And oh my gosh, I couldn't be farther from the truth, because obviously everybody's different. And just because you have this great persona and project yourself well at church and everybody thinks you're wonderful and Mr. Spiritual, it isn't always that way at home, and you don't always do everything you're going to say as a couple when you're talking about it and assuming, oh, sure, we're going to pray together and we're going to go to church and we're going to, serve and we're going to be good parents and do all these things. And, 5 out of my 7 husbands were Mormons, and it was never that way. They were abusive and in many different forms. And like I said, they had one persona at church and a different persona at home. And most of them were not interested in really working on any problems that came up. And the problems did not center around, would we go to church? That was never the problem. That was just, that was our life. But it's just that it's funny, because I was thinking about this yesterday. I was on my walk. It's like you're taught that, husband and wife are helpmeets. So in my mind, and now I really believe in, partners need to be equal. And, but they also teach that the man is the head of the household. But, the women, there's nothing wrong with being a good, strong woman. And because the women have leadership roles in the church, you just don't run the church. But, so my husbands took it very seriously that the man was the head of the household, so of course, whatever he said went, and, and sometimes with an iron fist. So, yeah, so it was an interesting road. And some guys, and again, I didn't court them long enough to have long conversations about, what do we really have in common besides dancing and going to church and, movies that we might like. What are the deeper things that are the core of our being or our core values, or, what do we really find important? And I think back on it now, and we just never got around to most of those topics. And I would highly advise that. Number 7 and I we courted for quite a while, and we had a lot of deep conversations. So, we did a lot of talking before we ever got married, and we still continue to do a lot of talking. And, so that's been great. So that's one great improvement over the others. But getting to know each other is a good idea.
And I think that's the problem, because when we're young, we don't look at those things. It is that
Yeah.
instant attraction. We're given that template of what's expected of us, or whether it's implicit or explicit.
Right.
We're just told that we receive those things of believing. Either we don't want the relationships that our parents had, and we're searching for that magical, wonderful relationship, as I did too. It was going to be that, you're going to find the love of your life. It's all going to be so romantic, roses round the door, and a lovely house in the country with 2.4 kids, or whatever it was. It was going to be magical. We can conquer the world. And I get it. But you're not given the tools or the understanding of that. The core beliefs and values are so much more important.
Right.
And I guess in a church setting, you're not going to be shown those things or taught them. So I know my parents didn't teach me any of that. I didn't see it around me. You just see that facade, don't you? And you think, that's what it's all about. But it isn't.
Well, no, and it's interesting because I remember, as I've been a bookkeeper for a very long time, and I used to be part of a networking group where we'd say, why we're doing the business we're doing. And just, one example, because like my parents, every month we saw them sit down together and pay the bills. And it was a painful experience because number one, money was usually tight, but it was always very painful, and they were both smoking, and my dad always had his martini there. But it got done, and there was some arguing. We usually went to the other rooms when they were paying bills. And after my dad died, I said, and my mom had no clue how to manage her money. I was like, what? You guys sat and paid bills every month together. Oh yeah, my job was to put the check in the envelope. So it's like there was no communication about money. And I don't even know at what point my mom knew that they were in as much debt as they were. I don't even know if he told her, but clearly there was no communication in that one very important aspect. So, that's part of, besides, it turns out several people in my family have been in the accounting profession, but, that's one reason why I stayed in it, because I wanted to help people, especially women who are suddenly single. It's like that have no clue how to manage their money because the man did it all. And, it's funny because I think my current husband, I remember his dad was probably like that. He did managed all the money, and he had his wife, here's your household allowance, you buy the groceries with that, and you buy the incidentals with that. And I told my husband, I said, it's like, I'm a bookkeeper. That's not how it's going to be. We're going to have to communicate about money, even if there's a household, budget, whatever, but it's like, I'm not going to be kept in the dark about the money type of thing. So it's like, it's important to me to know how much there is, where it's going, how we're going to spend it,
Yeah, I agree. So many arguments and problems arise simply because there is not that communication, or
Correct.
You get the husbands who give the wives an allowance for the housekeeping. I just think, how demeaning is that? It's we're not their slave. We're not their, somebody who's in a lesser position. We have a right, even if your main job is bringing up the kids. I think it's really important that the partner doesn't feel that she's not working. And I hear that so often. So yeah, I'm really with you on that one.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's interesting. My youngest granddaughter is 13. And she's trying to navigate, it's like, well, how do you talk to people you might be interested in? How do you have conversations? And we've, I've been watching her and her sister and her mom, talk about these kind of things. And she actually came up with a list of questions that she could ask a person, to have some conversations. Like, well, good for you. Let me see that list. I want to share it. I want to see. It's like, do I need to ask Grandpa any of these questions? And also, it's like, I think the podcast listeners would love to hear some of your questions, because they're definitely questions I probably never asked anybody that I was dating. And it's like, good for you at 13 to sit down and write a list of questions.
Absolutely.
She's very fussy. And I mean, and she knows what she wants. And, it's like, it's just interesting because, she wants somebody to ask her, can I hold your hand or can I hug you? And, she wants the opportunity to say no. If, it's like, well, sure, you need, and boundaries. And that leads, the other thing is like boundaries is one thing I never set very well for myself in business or in relationships. I learned from an early age, watching my mom to be a people pleaser. And I was very codependent. And sure, I don't drink, but I'll go buy you that alcohol that you insist you need to have. And, sure, I will let you, or I will sit by while you spank my daughter, even though I don't think you should be laying a hand on her, or, it just different things until it becomes enough. And you say, that's enough. And, I was gonna say a couple of my relationships lasted 5 years, and most of that was 2 or 3 or 4 years too long. Most of them, a lot of them only lasted a year. And, some of them, it's like, I just didn't, especially I'm on 7. Okay. So especially number 6, it's like, we were married for a while. And then my daughter was going off to Japan as a foreign exchange student. And I realize now it's like, I didn't want to be alone. So, that's probably why I married the guy that I did. And we got married and, traded houses back and forth before she left. And then she was gone. It's like, okay, so we're married. I'll live with you now. And she came back and, all these problems were coming to the surface. And I go, oh, this isn't working. I'm going to go live with her for a while. And then we got back together. And, then I was realizing the problems didn't go away. And I started going to therapy, and I go, will you come with me to therapy? Oh, no, the problems are all yours. It's like, oh, excuse me. It's like, yeah, they weren't all mine, but he wasn't willing to do his part. And that's another thing, we both sides need to work on the issues, because it's never just one person's problem. And especially if you can talk with a person who's, a third party and non-biased, or, impartial is a better word, and to listen and let you vent it out. And so, that's very interesting. And, but he wasn't interested. So, okay, I'll see ya. It's like, I gotta go.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just the talking has to be there. And even, with husband now, one of the reasons why we talk so much is because he's in prison. So,
and that's really an interesting one, because we haven't mentioned your current husband at all, have we? We talked about the previous 6 and so on, but that is a really interesting relationship and how you met. So let's explain that to the listeners. Because
sure. Well, I was roommates with a woman whose husband was in prison. So I'd been used to like visiting him once or twice with her. And I'd gone to visit, other people, just visiting the prison. It wasn't my normal activity, but it wasn't scary. And she came home one day and said, oh, I met this really nice guy. He's friends with my husband. He was visiting with his mom. He's really nice, really smart. I'm going, oh, smart. That would be a new kind of boyfriend for me. So that would be good. And we started writing. And a couple months later, I was approved to visit. And I started visiting him in person. So that was great. And again, so we courted for 5 years. And at prison visiting, all you can do is a brief hug and a brief kiss at the beginning of each visit. So there's no, even if your hormones are raging, you can't do anything about it. So we would sit, we'd have our hug and we'd sit and talk for hours. And, you can eat, there's food you can buy there. And, we'd hold hands and we'd just talk for hours. And that's what we did for 5 years. And even when we got married in the prison visiting room, and my daughter came. So she's met my husband once. But it's interesting because even though we have talked and talked and talked, and we write letters pretty much every day, so there's a lot of communication. even into 20, 25 years, we're still learning that there can always be improvement in the communication, especially with COVID, because that stopped our ability to see each other weekly. And, you try to say things through letters and it doesn't get communicated well. And then one side might take it wrong. And then, and the staff that, reads the mail. So I try not to get too cranky in my letters, but sometimes I do, and sometimes he does, and it's just normal. That's human. But we've realized that we do much better talking in person than trying, because it's like sometimes not all our letters get to each other, so not all the communication is there, and it's like, okay, well, and we've also agreed, it's like if this is coming up, then try and explain it in a letter, but we might have to wait until, but try not to get too upset until we can talk about it in person, because some of the communication gets lost in the letter.
Yeah, and I think that is so pertinent to so many couples nowadays who don't have that situation that you just described.
Right.
I think one of the most important things you talked about was that you got to know each other before the hormones got involved. And I'm not saying that, that physical attraction isn't important and sex isn't important, but you got to know each other. You were talking, so you were going to learn more about your core values and beliefs. That was really important.
Yeah.
And I think the next point that I really found important was that you had to communicate a lot via letter, but you recognize the written word can be misconstrued.
They can, and yes.
And I see that happening with couples time after time. They'll send each other a text, and we know that the written word is only one-dimensional, and you don't know the emotion behind it. You can interpret it in a million different ways. And that's where the misunderstanding gets. And that's where the arguments happen, the fallout is constant. And then there's no going back, because they just end up in that battling situation of the power struggle, the kind of you hurt me, you said, you did. And it becomes so toxic. So I think that message is really valuable, Jo Ann. I think that is so vital. If nothing else, I think that is just amazing.
Yeah, and we cannot text each other because he's not allowed to legally have a cell phone in prison, so he doesn't. So there's no texting, and they have an email system, but it still gets printed out and read. And that was working for a while, but we found that they were saving them, and they'd give them to him like a week's worth of emails at a time. So, but it takes like 2 to 3 weeks for my letters to get to him. And it only takes, he's in California, and we have a house in California. So, it only should take a day or two. And even his letters here to Portland only take a day, a couple of days. So it's just the staff holding things up. And I was going to say, like, we've been married at, almost 20 years, but a couple of years ago, I think in 2017, 18, somewhere along the line, I don't know, few years ago, the governor of California, they approved these family visits, overnight visits, family visits with parents, immediate family. So it's not just husband and wife. They had been taken away from people with life sentences, and then they were given back. So after 15, 16, 17 years of marriage, we finally got to have a couple of days to ourselves. And that's even helped the communication. It's like, because then we could sit, not in a room with a million other people, and we could just sit in an apartment and cook for each other and just sit there and relax and even have deeper conversations than you can have. Because, when we visit in person, it's like you have an hour and a half, and it's like, oh, it's crowded, you got to go now. It's like, we just started talking. I just got here. But so yeah, again, I just can't stress how the communication and meaningful communication, so it's good, because we have family stuff to talk about, and we have house stuff to talk about. And, we have, he was involved with weird stuff in the military. So we talk about that. And, it's like, and we both believe in magical things. So we have a lovely eclectic variety of things we talk about.
Yeah, and it seems that those conversations are not going to involve all that stuff that gets in the way. Like you left your socks on the floor. Why can't you put the bin out? It's all of that stuff that gets in the way of relationship because they bicker and snarl at each other so often about that trivia and get caught up in it all. And I think, whilst it must have been I can't imagine what it's like being married to somebody in that situation where you can't have that, you can't live together. But it's opened up a different way of you communicating with each other, as you say, on a much deeper level.
Correct.
So there must be a much deeper intimacy between you. We're not just talking sex now. Intimacy is much deeper. It's about being able to be vulnerable with each other and talking at a much deeper level.
It is, because, and again, this relationship is different for both of us. And, because I think for both of us, our prior relationships were based on the chemistry first and the talking later, if there was talking. So it's been good for us. And again, even now in our later 60s, we're still learning ways to improve things. And, it is nice to, and like the family visits, I do get to see, well, he does pick up his socks and he does clean up after himself and he loves to cook. And it's like, oh, this is great, because when he just comes out for an hour or two, it's still hard for him to shake his prison persona that he has to, you have to put up a shell around yourself of protect. Not that he's a weak person by any means, and he can certainly take care of himself, but you have to act differently when you're around a bunch of prison inmates and prison staff than you can with your wife and your family and stuff. So he gets to relax when we have these 2 days together every now and then. And that's really nice. And we can talk without interruption. So and without being recorded and without people reading things. And every now and then we'll play a board game or we'll watch movies that we like in common and things like that. So it's a little bit, it's a lovely side, a little glimpse into normal life.
Yeah.
And with COVID, he's freely told me many times that there's many prison couples that have not made it. They have not stayed together because it's just too hard. And thankfully, we're still hanging in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we started doing video visits. So,
oh.
Yeah, and I don't get to see him that often in person. I was supposed to see him the end of January, and there was another rise in COVID cases throughout the prison system. So they canceled all the visits, but I think they're starting to open up again. So hopefully I'll see him again pretty soon. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to ask a kind of quite, maybe, I don't know how you feel about this question, but do you either of you or both of you feel that your husband is kind of institutionalized after all this time living within a prison community?
Is he what?
Institutionalized.
No. He's, no. He has PTSD from the military anyway, right. So that prison makes that more difficult. But he's very much his own man. He always has a job. He's always reading. He is always mentoring people. He runs a veterans group, and he's involved with a lot of activities, to keep him, and he does hobbies. So he keeps himself busy and sane, and he's not into drugs. So I would say, he's not institutionalized. It will take him time, when he gets the chance to get out. And we're still hoping that's going to happen, but it will take him time to get adjusted.
Yeah.
But I think he'll manage.
Yeah, because it'll be a very different world to the one that he left.
It is, and it will be. He's kept himself very much in the loop, and he has kids that talk to him and keep him apprised of what's happening around the world, and he watches the news religiously. So it's not like he's kept himself in a shell there. So he's very into what's going on around him. So I think he'll be fine. He'll get right back to work and his writing, and he's a entrepreneur, so he'll easily get something going, and he's not one to just sit around.
No, it doesn't sound like it.
No,
it was just one of those questions I think a lot of people will be curious about, because being in a prison environment for such a long time, I guess people would assume, I think, that, they're institutionalized, because I think in lots of different ways, even within the Mormon church, there would be some kind of institutionalization, wouldn't there?
Right.
For those that, not for everybody maybe, but there is that sense, isn't there, that you're within a kind of community and therefore you're protected, or you're removed from, or there's a way of life.
Well, and I think one thing that's helped us or him, both of us, it's like even though he has a life sentence, we've always talked about, okay, when you come home, and the house we have in California is the house he grew up in. So, it's like, when you come home, we'll be doing this or this or this. And we'll talk about, it's like, okay, well, I can't wait till, today would be a great day to take you on that drive, or to go to this restaurant, so it's not like we assume he's never coming home. And, I don't know, maybe he will, or maybe he won't, but it's like, number one, he has a house that we continually have to talk about and deal with. So there is real life that he has to think about and be involved with. So, there's non-prison things he can think about. So I think that's helped him.
Yeah, helped him understand the world outside, because otherwise I could imagine it could become just that way. If you were of that mindset, maybe some people might fall into that. Yeah. Wow, it's been so fascinating talking with you again, Jo Ann.
Thank you.
I just love talking with you. You really do inspire me in so many ways.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask you, what is one thing you think that the listeners could take away with themselves?
And besides the communication being important, what I have learned, and especially through the process of writing my book and just working on myself, because I've done a lot of work on myself these last couple of years, especially, is to take really good care of yourself and know what's important to yourself. And, whether you're in a relationship or not, you're going to be a better person for your business colleagues or your spouse or your kids or whatever, if you're taking good care of yourself. And if you need to make changes, it's never too late to do that. Because I, didn't start really changing my life till I was in my 40s, and I'm still working on that in my later 60s. So, it's just never too late to make the changes you need to make, and do take good care of yourself, because otherwise, it's not good. But
no, I'm with you.
And that doesn't make you a selfish person. I think I've become a better person for taking better care of myself.
Absolutely. I'd echo that completely. So it's brilliant. I'm going to put all your details in the show notes.
Okay.
But I want one easy way that people can get in touch with you.
Sure. My book's website is dragonhillbooks.net. So through there's a contact page, and my email is all on there. So they can email me, find me that way. And I'm on Facebook, Jo Ann Richards. So,
and Instagram.
Yes. I'm learning how to use Instagram, and I have a Facebook group for my under MIDLIFE MAGIC. So many ways to find me.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. Thank you so much today.
And thank you for having me.
It's been an absolute delight. Thank you.
I hope you found this episode interesting as well as helpful. And you can find out more about my guest by going into the show notes. If you'd like to learn more about me, then go to my website, wendykatewell.co.uk. And there you can also book a call and find out how you can work with me. In the meantime, take care of yourself. Until next time, bye.